The St. Louis Blues. They are my favorite team, not just in hockey, but in all the sports teams I root for. The Blues have been St. Louis's team for more than half a century, yet there was a time when they almost left St. Louis for a small Canadian town in the prairies. That city was Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. This is the tale of the Saskatoon Blues. Play the intro. Before we start, some history first. You get the drill by now. The Blues were founded in the 1967 expansion that doubled the size of the NHL from 6 to 12. St. Louis was placed in the West Division with the other expansion teams. In their first season, the Blues were mediocre. All the expansion teams were either mediocre or bad. They finished third in the West with a 27-31-6 record, but they made it to the Cup final. The Blues nearly blew a 3-1 series lead against the division-winning Flyers, but they took care of business in Game 7. Then they edged the North Stars in a chippy series that required 7. In Game 7, Ron Schock scored the game-winning goal in double overtime to send the Blues to the Stanley Cup final. The path might have been fixed due to the division structure, but they had a chance to shock the world. Unfortunately, the Blues were swept by the Montreal Canadiens. While they were swept, all 4 games were decided by 1 goal. Had the Blues won Game 1 and or Game 3 in overtime, could history look different? We'll never know. The next year, the Blues became the first of the 6 new teams to finish over 500 with a 37-25-14 record. The Blues swept both the Flyers and Kings on their way to the finals where, repeat last year's ending, swept by Les Canadiens. Again! Alright, third time should be the charm, right? The Blues won their division again. While the North Stars and Penguins both gave them fits, both were dismantled en route to their third straight finals appearance. Even better, the Canadiens missed the playoffs, so the Blues had a chance. They still got swept. Not by the Canadiens, but the Boston Bruins. It wasn't even close. The Bruins won the first 3 games by at least 3 or more goals. Boston clinched the cup with Bobby Orr's famous goal in Game 4. After that, the Blues slid a bit due to factors in and out of their control. They would make the playoffs in 6 out of their next 7 seasons, but only won a series once. The honeymoon period was over for the Blues. It was time to rebuild. Then in 1977, everything crumbled. The Blues were sold to Ralston Purina. But how did this happen? We need to go back to the beginning. In 1967, while the NHL had Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Minnesota, Los Angeles, and Oakland chosen for expansion, St. Louis was a conditional franchise. St. Louis was given a conditional franchise, but if a suitable owner wasn't found, they would give the franchise to Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore was considered for the 6th team. But Chicago Blackhawks owner Arthur Wirtz was adamant about St. Louis getting an NHL team. Yes, the Blackhawks are the reason why the Blues exist today. It was mainly to get rid of the St. Louis Arena, which he had no use for besides his minor league team, but his fingerprints are all over the birth of the Blues. Wirtz notified a suitable owner for this team, Sidney Solomon Jr. and his son, Sid Solomon III. Sidney Solomon Jr. was an executive for a life insurance firm. He was no stranger to owning a sports team. Before the Blues, he owned minority stakes in the St. Louis Browns and Cardinals. Solomon created the Missouri Arena Corporation, which owned the St. Louis Arena and the franchise, which Sid III suggested the idea of St. Louis Blues as a team name after the song by W.C. Handy. The Solomons weren't like other owners. When Red Berenson scored 6 goals in a game against the Flyers, the Solomons gave him a new car, a canoe, and a shotgun. Berenson said, and I quote, "In New York or Montreal, all you'd get would be a handshake." The Solomons even gave the Blues players and their wives trips to Florida during the offseason on the house. It's not like the other teams in the NHL liked what the Solomons were doing with their team. Maple Leafs head coach and GM Punch Imlach said, "I think the Solomons are on very thin ice with that kind of stuff. From a management point of view, it's bad. It puts every other club in the league in an impossible competitive position." The Solomons also had rebellious ways to respond to criticism. "I think Mr. Imlach owes us an apology. We're not trying to tell or show anyone else how to run their clubs.
We paid $2 million for this franchise, and we're entitled to run it the way we please. Another comparison is Blues goalie Jacques Plante. Yes, the former Canadiens goalie, the pioneer of the goalie mask, also played for the Blues. He stated how he was making $35,000 in St. Louis, which was more than he made in Montreal. Unlike other owners who viewed the players as slaves, the Solomons treated the Blues like royalty. So how did a stable ownership group go under? Well, economics played a part. There was financial trouble brewing with the Solomons. Crown Life Insurance, a firm that partnered with the Solomons life insurance firm, terminated its agreement. This and a few lawsuits caused some financial panic, but there was more. The St. Louis arena was run down when Arthur Wirtz sold it to the Solomons. The Solomons had bought the arena for $4 million, paid $2 million for improvements, and the MAC spent around $11 million in maintenance costs. The Solomons wanted the new arena to be built south of Busch Stadium, or where the Dome at America Center is today. Politicians in St. Louis denied both options. Sid III even threatened to move the Blues to another city. The Solomons were losing money and weren't making enough money. In January 1977, they laid off a ton of employees to meet payroll. Attendance was also starting to decline. The Blues, who were league leaders for their entire existence, saw those numbers drop. Part of it was due to Sid's threat to move the team. Unfortunately, Sid III had a bad case of meddling in operations, causing the Blues to change players, coaches, and GMs like a deck of cards. Fans hadn't forgiven him for firing legendary coaches Scotty Bowman and Al Arbor. From 1971 to 1977, the Blues went through 6 general managers and 11 coaches. Another factor hit the Solomons. Both of them were suffering health-wise. Sid Jr. suffered 2 heart attacks in a month, and Sid III was in the hospital with Hodgkin's disease. The Blues were driving off a cliff, and they needed someone to save them. The Solomons hired Emile the Cat Francis as vice president, GM, and head coach. He was looking for someone to buy the Blues and their debt. Francis nearly found someone. Fred Coomer, the president of HBE. There was only one problem. Coomer wanted the Blues' debt to be reduced. The biggest one was from Cousins Mortgage and Equity Insurance. Ironically, Cousins was one of the 2 owners that moved the St. Louis Hawks to Atlanta. While negotiations were happening, more creditors came, including a city council member for unpaid taxes. Coomer walked out of negotiations due to the laundry list of creditors. But then, someone came to save the Blues. Ralston Purina, the St. Louis-based pet food company, came to buy the Blues, the St. Louis Arena, and the debt the Blues were stuck with. Ralston's chairman, R. Hal Dean, said it was civic duty to buy the Blues. However, it was only a temporary ownership until a suitable owner could be found to keep the Blues. The Solomons were a rise and fall story. They had good intentions with the Blues, but actions in and out of their control caused the sale. While their later actions caused this, they do deserve credit for being the first owner of the Blues and bringing the NHL to St. Louis. Now, how did this temporary marriage work? The new ownership made their first mark by renaming the arena to the Checkerdome to match the logo of Purina. The Blues improved drastically on the ice. After finishing with 18 wins, the Blues kicked off a postseason streak that lasted for 25 seasons. 1981 was the best season the Blues had in their history. They won their division and had the second best record in the NHL. They were knocked out in the second round, but there was life in the Blues. Unfortunately, off the ice, more trouble was brewing. R. Hal Dean, the Ralston Purina chairman who bought the Blues, retired in 1981. The new chairman, William Stritz, wasn't interested in the Blues. He saw them as a tenant that was draining them of money and put the Blues up for sale. One group interested was Anheuser-Busch. The St. Louis-based beer giant offered Ralston Purina the $12 million they were asking for to buy the Blues, but Purina refused to sell the Blues to Anheuser-Busch. In January of 1983, Ralston Purina told the public in a shocked St. Louis that they received an offer from a group from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. This group was called Betoniheiser Enterprises. The president of this group was no stranger to hockey. Bill Hunter was a founding member of the World Hockey Association and wanted to bring an NHL team to his home, Saskatoon. For those wondering where Saskatoon is, at the time, it was a small town in the Canadian prairies. In 1983, Saskatoon had a population of 172,000. Winnipeg had a population of 600,000, and Quebec City had 586,000. St. Louis was larger than all three with 1,880,000. Why did I mention this? Winnipeg and Quebec City had teams despite small populations, but were both larger than Saskatoon. Despite the questions of stability and support, Hunter and his group were going full steam ahead. The Blues were aware, and their record slipped to 25, 40, and 15, barely making the playoffs. On April 19th, the sale was complete.
everything was in place. Hunter and his group had everything ready: logos, jerseys, uniforms, merchandise, an 18,000-seat arena that would be complete before the next season. The only thing that was missing was the NHL's approval. The NHL Board of Governors met to discuss the vote. Hunter needed 75% of the owners to vote in favor of the move, and the owners said no. The move was rejected 15-3, with 3 abstaining. The only 3 owners that were in favor of the move were the Calgary Flames, the Montreal Canadiens, and the Winnipeg Jets, all Canadian teams. I couldn't find who rejected the move and who abstained, but one owner was very critical of the move. Harold Ballard, the infamous and reviled owner of the Toronto Maple Leafs, said, "Who the hell wants to go to Saskatoon anyway? I don't want to be taking dog sleds to get around." The NHL was concerned with the small population and if Saskatoon would survive long term. While the vote failed, that wasn't the end of this tale. The Blues were still in trouble. Ralston and the NHL filed lawsuits back at each other. Ralston threatened to dissolve the Blues entirely and give players to other teams. There was a huge question mark as to whether the Blues would be a franchise in October. As the NHL draft in Montreal happened, the Blues didn't show up, becoming the first and only team in the history of sports to not participate in the draft. On June 13th of that offseason, the NHL took the Blues from Ralston Purina. The NHL was looking for a new owner to keep the Blues in St. Louis. However, if the NHL couldn't find a buyer, they would dissolve the franchise. The NHL had not contracted a team in 5 years when the Cleveland Barons were merged into the Minnesota North Stars. Thankfully, someone came at the 11th hour to save the Blues.
Harry Ornest had owned minor league teams and had dreams of owning a professional team. Ornest and a group of local investors bought the Blues, keeping them in St. Louis. The ownership would only last 3 seasons when Ornest sold the Blues to a St. Louis native Michael Shanahan. Ornest passed away in 1988. While his time with the Blues was short, he deserves credit as well. Despite running the Blues on a shoestring budget, he saved them from relocation and contraction. The Blues gained stability and returned to being a powerhouse in the NHL. Yet something was missing: a Stanley Cup. In January 2019, nobody thought it was coming. The Blues were in last place in the NHL, yet they shocked everyone. They made the playoffs with a furious second half. They grounded the Jets in the first round, smashed the Stars in the second round, broke the Sharks in the third round, and in the Cup final, won the Stanley Cup over the Bruins in 7 games. The St. Louis Blues won the Stanley Cup for the first time in their history. All the failure, all the bad ownership decisions, the threats of relocation and contraction, all the time seeing rivals and former players win cups, washed away. But while the Blues won the cup, what happened with Saskatoon?
After trying to get the Blues failed, Bill Hunter wanted to try again. In the 90s, he tried to get an expansion team, but the bid never went through. Hunter passed away in 2002 due to brain cancer. While Saskatchewan failed to get the Blues came to Saskatchewan. On July 6, 2019, Saskatchewan-born Blues players Tyler Bozak, Jaden Schwartz, and Braden Shen brought the Stanley Cup to a Saskatchewan Roughriders game. While it wasn't Saskatchewan's championship, 3 players from their province won it and brought it to Saskatchewan for everyone to enjoy it. In a way, Saskatchewan still has roots with the Blues. Maybe someday, on a cold night in either Regina or Saskatoon, a Saskatchewan team will take the ice on Hockey Night in Canada against the St. Louis Blues. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. And a huge thanks to Blues Fan Reacts for suggesting this idea. The Blues are back on the ice tomorrow when they take on the Dallas Stars. I have something else planned for this season, so stay tuned for that. If I get to 500 subscribers before December 27th, I'll do a Q&A for my birthday. I'll see you in the next video.